I can't be the only person on the planet that didn't know about these Node.js features. Let me show you what I'm talking about by going through the top 10 modern Node.js runtime features you need to start using in 2024. But first, let's make sure we're all on the same page and using the correct version of Node.js. You want to make sure you're on the latest long-term support version, or LTS version. And as of this recording, as of now, 20.12.0 is the latest LTS version. If you need to check to make sure that you have that, I'm going to show you how to do that really quick. You come into your terminal, you type in node-v, which is short for -- version. And I can see I'm on node 20.12. If you don't have this version and you need to install the new latest LTS version, 20.12.0, then you can install that from nodejs.org and get the download there. But I personally highly recommend you use the Node Version Manager tool, or NVM. It's available for both Mac OS and Linux, the one version of it, and then there's another version that's for Windows, which I have as well. So for that, you can do NVM install 20.12.0 and you'll be good to go. Or if you need to check, you can say ls remote 20 to see what versions of 20 are available. So there you go. Okay, now for those features that we were talking about earlier. I'm going to first introduce a feature and then I'll show you how to take advantage of some of them today. Starting with feature number 1. One of the most exciting introductions is the native Node.js test runner. Say goodbye to juggling multiple third-party frameworks like Mocha, Jest, Chai, those ones that you probably are familiar with if you do any type of testing with Node applications. And by the way, a little caveat or note here, most of these things that I'm going to show you allow you to remove the need for any third-party libraries that were previously fulfilling the needs and features that we're talking about here. But anyway, back to this one. There is a node::test module that's available now in this latest version of Node that allows you to streamline your testing directly within Node.js. Let's set up a basic test together now. As I mentioned before, there's the node::test module that you can use. I'm going to show you my test that I have. I want to test this function here. Very boring, simple function, I know, but it is an add function that adds A and B parameters together. And that's it. Let's test it. So I have a test folder and I have my math.test.js file that covers testing that functionality. I import test and describe functions from the node test module. Describe and all these types of things that you're used to seeing from other testing frameworks and third-party plugins, you're going to find it to be very familiar to you because you can use describe to aggregate or put together related tests into one area, like test suite 1 as we're calling it here. You can do setup and tear down functionality or steps that you need to do within the before each and after each functionality that's available there. And then you run your test with test, the name of the thing that you're, or how you want to name your test, and then the function to run to do the test. And within there is when you can do the AAA approach, right? Which is arrange, act, and assert. Arrange being maybe you set up parameters, configuration, then you actually call the function that you want to test, that type of thing. And then you assert whether the result of running that function is providing the expected result that you want. So in this case, I'm adding 1 and 2. I expect that result to strictly equal 3, integer here. And where did this assert come from? The node assert module that's available built into Node as well. So again, no longer do you need third-party packages to help you do the testing. You can do it directly within Node.js. Now, how do I run and test the tests, right? Well, you go to your terminal. I want to run specifically the math tests only right now. So I'm going to do node-tests and then the path or the file that I want to use that has the tests in it for me. I hit enter and let's make this terminal a bit bigger. Hide this here and we can see it ran the describe of test suite 1, 2, and 3, showed the results of those tests, whether they passed or failed, or they were skipped, or they're to-do items, and how long each test took to run. And at the end, you see a summary of everything too, which is really nice. So awesome to see. Very welcome feature built into Node.js, a test runner, along with some test functionality with the test module and assert module. Feature number 2, we're going to talk about mocking. Mocking is essential for you to isolate your tests from external code and services. With Node.js native mocking feature, you can easily replace complex dependencies with stubs. Here's how to create and use mock in your tests now. And we can see, very similar to the test, there is a mock function that we have available to us from the node test module. How do I go about mocking things? Well, let's take a look at the other tests that I have here, which is this .env. So the idea behind this .env is me recreating the .env functionality of reading an environment variable file from the file system And when I want to test my functionality that's doing that and loading that up, I don't want to actually hit the file system. I don't want to have to rely on there being an actual env file. And instead, I want to mock that functionality. And in particular, what I'm using to read the file is from the file system module that has a read file function on it. So I can mock that and change how that implementation behaves with my mock, so that when it's called in my code that I'm testing, it will just show that instead. It will just run that implementation that I overrode it with, basically. So in this case, I'm writing a mock implementation that's going to return a port that's equal to 3000 to simulate that env file. Then I'm going to tell mock to mock this method that's found on the fs module, the read file function, and then I want to replace it with my mock implementation. And I store that in this mocked read file. And that allows me to determine when I load my env from an env file, the results I get should be equal to 3000, and then I can test that mocked functionality was called at least one time, or in this case, exactly one time. And that is how mocking is now implemented natively to Node.js. It's another welcome feature. On to feature number 3. Achieving high test coverage is crucial for maintaining robust code. Node.js now includes native test coverage capabilities within it. Let me guide you through enabling and utilizing this feature to get insightful coverage reports for your project. Test coverage. Now, one thing to note about this, that it's flagged behind an experimental flag. So, and a few of these you're going to see are behind a flag like this. So take it with a grain of salt that this may potentially change in the future. You might need to look out for that and understand that it might not be the same as what you're seeing today in this video. So just take note of that. So I'm going to copy this and run this directly in my terminal so you can see how quick and easy it is to generate code coverage. And make note of what we just saw before when I ran the test, actually, like this, okay? It's going to be different in the sense of like what is available and shown afterwards, after the tests are complete. So I'm going to run node -- experimental test coverage test, and then those tests in the folder there. And now we can see I get a coverage report. How much line percentage coverage I have in each individual file, branch coverage, function coverage, all that fun stuff. Again, similar to other third-party tools that you might use to generate coverage reports, you're getting that natively in Node.js. On to feature number 4 now. Node.js's watch mode is a game changer for developers, allowing for real-time feedback during development. Let's explore how to use this feature to automatically rerun your app and/or tests upon file changes. If you remember, in the past, or before this was available in the latest version of Node.js, we would have to use something like nodemon. But now we don't need to do that anymore. I don't need to install this third-party package. Instead, I just need to run node with the -- watch flag and then the file that I want to run. So in this case, I have this index.js file, which is right here. It's a very simple console.log. Let's change this to hello demo, save that. And now I'm going to run node -- watch index.js. And you'll notice it changes a little bit different, where it's like it's not exiting out of the process from running because it's waiting for files to change and restart for us. So I'm going to say hello demo YouTube, save that, and now we can see the output in the console that's being logged is showing those changes. One more time, I save, we can see YouTube ones automatically refreshing, automatically getting those latest changes and rerunning the process for us so that we can see them. Huge improvement, and very helpful tool to have, especially directly in Node.js. Feature number 5, Corepack. Corepack is your bridge to seamless package management in Node.js. It is an experimental tool that allows you to use your project's specified package manager, think PnPM, Yarn, or the native NPM that you would have, without having to do global installations. I'll show you how to enable Corepack and specify your package manager in your project now. Coming back over to my screen here, Corepack. What is this thing about? I've never heard of it before. It kind of sounds like Webpack. Well, the idea is it's a zero runtime dependency project that acts as a bridge between Node.js projects and their package managers. So no need to install a package manager separately. It'll get handled by this Corepack and isolate it for you, and it doesn't pollute your underlying system that you're developing on. So, and the other thing behind that, right, is like different projects use different package managers. Maybe you use NPM all the time, but somebody else is using Yarn, or another project is using PnPM, and you contribute to those open source projects and you want to support it without having to pollute your system. That's where Corepack comes in. So how do you get started with that? Well, the project has to update the package JSON to indicate a package manager field. And then in there, you describe what package manager you're using and the version of it that you want to use. So in this case, we're saying Yarn 2.4.1. Then if you want to get it set up, let's say you just pulled this project down to your machine, you want to get everything loaded and ready to go, you say Corepack enable, hit enter. I've already enabled it. And then you say Corepack install, which I've already done that too. So it should be all set to go. So now I can say things, I can use yarn in here, and you'll notice it's doing a yarn install for me. But really quick, I didn't have to. If I ls my global npm dependencies, you'll notice that it doesn't have yarn installed anymore there. I didn't have to install that globally. It's isolated with Corepack. Corepack is handling that. So a pretty cool feature that I didn't know I needed. Feature number 6, the introduction of native support for loading .env files, environment variable files, directly by Node.js marks a significant improvement in application configuration. Previously, like all of these or many of these, we've relied on third-party libraries like .env or crossenv, but now that's no longer necessary. Let's see how to use this native feature to load environment variables without any external dependencies now. So as I mentioned, you don't need .env or crossenv anymore, which in some cases like .env, you would have to modify your source code in order to load up environment variables. I would have to import it and then say .env.config, call the config function in order for that to work. And sometimes I would even forget to do that, even though I installed it. And now I don't need to do that because Node supports it with yet another CLI flag, nodeenv. So if I want to run the index file here, or I want to run my server, which is relying on debug mode environment variable, and I think the port, port, and even host if I wanted to, right? So in order for that to work, I need to tell it about this env file, which has port 1338. So I'm going to say node -env file is going to equal to .env, and then I'm going to run server.js. So I'm going to run node env file, point it to my env file and server.js. I hit enter, and now we can see it is running. It loaded up and it's wanting to open up in my browser for me. VS Code is recognizing that on port 1338. Let's actually stop this, and just to prove that this is indeed loading from the environment file, I'm going to change it to 1337, run that again, and we can see it's now running on port 1337. Glad to see this feature built into Node.js as well now. Feature number 7. To help in transitioning from CommonJS modules to ECMAScript modules, or ESM, Node.js offers some interoperability, such as when navigating file paths. So when working with ES modules, this has been streamlined with the introduction of the import.meta.dirname or import.meta.filename. And no longer do we need to do a bit of ceremony just to support this for ESM, and instead we can use these new native features. I'll show you how these features simplify accessing file paths in your Node.js application. In the past, you would have to use things like path and URL to try and extract the directory name of the current location that you want to get, or the directory name of a file path that you're working with. But now what you can do is you can use import.meta to extract that out, deconstruct it, the dir name and file name from there, and then use that however you may need. So in this case, I'm setting up this file path for the setup.yml, which is intentionally in the wrong location, but that's for a later feature we're going to talk about shortly. And that allows me to then read that file synchronously based on the file path that we constructed using the directory name. So this simplifies things quite a bit for folks that are working within ESM, and avoid some of the extra code cruft, if you will. Feature number 8. Node.js has promise-based timers, and they offer a more elegant syntax for asynchronous timing operations. And it's actually been available since version 16 of Node. But I personally haven't realized it until now, for one, and maybe you haven't either. But in any case, let's dive into how to use these timers in your code to create delays or repeat actions with ease. All right, so I have some examples here in the README of timer promises. In the past, if you wanted to make a set timeout to be promiseified instead of callback based, well, you would have to wrap it in a new promise, which is not too big of a deal, but it adds some extra code, right? And as you can see here, I created this sleep function that wraps the set timeout in a promise, and it will sleep for the amount of milliseconds that gets passed into that function. And then in the demo function, I say, hey, we're going to take a break. We await, it's an asynchronous function now, keep that in mind. We await for the sleep function to finish and resolve, and then we log out 2 seconds later. Now, afterwards, what we can do is it just naturally promiseified, because there is the node:timers/promises module that is the promise-based versions of set timeout or set interval. And so with that, we can use .then, or like we were doing here, we can await it. So nice little quality of life improvement, and it helps reduce a bit of the code that you have to write. Feature number 9, Node.js permissions model is a forward-thinking feature for securing your applications by controlling resource access. Let's explore how to enable and configure permissions for your Node.js application for enhanced security. Now, in particular, what we're going to be talking about is process-based permissions, and then we're going to talk about module-based permissions, which is under the policy feature. That's feature number 10 we're going to talk about. But first, process-based permissions. Think of this like if you've heard of Deno. Deno has this at the forefront of like how it was created, in the sense that it limits what the process has access to, and you have to toggle on features that you want, permissions that you want to enable, like reading from the file system or spinning off a child process, that type of thing. So what you do is, one, I want to note again, just like some of these other features we were talking about, this is behind an experimental flag, so it could change in the future. So that's why we use --experimental -permission when we start the process up, the Node app up. And then if you don't add any other flags there, well, it's really just going to fail right away. In fact, I'm going to show you how that behaves. I'm going to copy this so I don't have to type it. I'm going to say node, paste that in, and then my server.js. And you'll see it says error access denied, file system read could not read this resource server.js, right? Because I didn't explicitly say that this process enable that permission. So the way I do that is with all these respective flags that are available, where there's allow file system read or allow file system write. The asterisk is a wildcard, meaning it can read anything on the system that the Node app is running on, or you can get more granular, more specific. And then there's a bunch of other ones here as an example. But let's try that out really quick. So one thing I've found, it's a bit finicky. Again, it's experimental. But if I do this and I say, let's say --allow fs read, and I say server.js, I'm getting other errors. What is this error? Load an ES module, type that. So it just starts behaving differently. Like something's funky with it, I've noticed. So what I've had to do in order to get this to work is essentially just say the whole folder of the project. So if I do /, then it works as expected. So I'm not sure exactly what's causing that. It's likely something because it's experimental and it's not fully fleshed out. But and you could even see I'm getting error access denied, but it is running my server now. So I'd like to see this improve and get enhanced over time and see where things lead to with it. So that's one little note and caveat I want to call out with that. Another one is it can be hard to debug issues with permissions. Like in the case from before, like why was this syntax error coming up all of a sudden when normally when I run it without this experimental flag permissions on, it's fine, you know, stuff like that. So that's just something to call out with that. The other thing is in the past, you used to be able to basically comma delimit the different files. In the case of allow file system read or write, you can comma delimit all the different files that you want to, or directories you want to enable for that, right? Or provide in that flag. However, you can't do that. That got taken back. They pulled that out for some reason. And so now you have to manually add for each one a new flag, a redundant flag of allow fs read. So that's one thing to call out. And then in the documentation, it says you can't use relative paths, but as you just saw, I did use a relative path. I did // That's relative to the current directory I'm working within. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on there in that case. Now, last but not least, if you are using this and you want to programmatically check that your app has the permissions needed, you can use, what ends up happening is when that flag is enabled, Node will add the permission object onto the process object so that you can check if it has a permission that you need and so forth. So an example of that is in the server.js, I believe, right? Yes, permission.has read to that file path that I'm looking for here, which was defined there like that. So if I don't have read permissions to that allow fs read to that file path, then I'll know, hey, I don't have that permissions to do that. So that is the process-based permissions feature. Now, I mentioned this in the previous feature, but we're moving on to feature number 10, the Node.js policy module. This provides a robust mechanism for ensuring the integrity and security of your code by enforcing policy-based restrictions on code execution. It helps prevent loading and executing malicious code through your app. I'll walk you through some of that functionality, what that looks like, but it's a little bit, again, also experimental and a little bit cumbersome to get started with if you wanted to. But the idea behind it is to prevent malicious actors being able to load up and execute attacking code that's going to attack and run within your system that you don't anticipate or want to permit. within the context of your application running if they get access in this way. So that's the idea here, is it allows you to define what source code, what modules that are expected to be used and run as part of your application, so that Node.js will know, okay, this thing is outside of that context and I shouldn't actually execute what's being attempted here. So that's the overall understanding that I have of it. And the way you enable that is by adding this experimental policy flag, and you point it to a policy file. Now, if you want to generate a policy file, this is what I was mentioning earlier. It can be cumbersome because you need to know every NPM package or node module that you're going to be relying on, and every file in your project, and you need to create an integrity signature and all this stuff that I'm still learning about, to be honest with you. But there's a tool out there called node-policy that helps generate that based on the current state of your project, so you can check that out if you'd like to. Speaking of permissions, policies, and security related features, in order to further strengthen your Node.js applications against vulnerabilities, consider integrating Snyk into your development workflow. Snyk offers powerful tools for you to identify and fix security issues in your dependencies. Let me show you how you can get started with that really quickly. All right, so you're going to head on over to snyk.io, and if you have an account, you'll click on login. If not, you'll click on sign up, and it'll bring you to this page here where you can either sign up and get started with a GitHub account, a Google account, and various other mechanisms that enable you to sign up or sign into your existing account with Snyk. Once you're signed in there, you'll be presented with your dashboard view that has all the projects that you have. You can add projects from GitHub. You can use the CLI locally. There's a CLI tool from Snyk that allow you to add it to your Snyk account, basically, so that it can then monitor your application for any vulnerabilities and alert you to them as they progress. Because maybe you don't have any today, but a new one might pop up in a dependency that you have tomorrow, and how would you know about it? Well, that's where Snyk comes in. And the way I typically use Snyk for the most part as a developer is within my favorite editor, which is likely going to be your favorite editor if you're using Node.js, and that is Visual Studio Code. So in order to get started with Snyk in Visual Studio Code, you need to install the extension, and the way you can do that is bring up the extensions view, which is this little icon in the activity bar. You search for Snyk, and you're going to want to install this one here. The preview one is not the one that you want to use. You want to use this one. You can see I already have it installed. Once you install it, you'll then go over to the little Snyk icon in the activity bar here right above my head. You click on that, and if you're not signed, like I'm already signed into my Snyk account via the Snyk extension in VS Code, but if you aren't, you likely won't be, there'll be an option here to sign in. And what that will do is it will open up your browser and redirect you to your sign in to your Snyk account in the browser, and then we'll redirect you back into VS Code once that goes through successfully, and you'll come back here. Then it will run a scan against your project, and it's going to look at what your dependencies are for open source. That's what this first one is here, and you can see no vulnerabilities are found there. It's going to look at my actual code and see if I have any security issues within that and alert me to that. And it does other things, like if you're using infrastructure as code, which I'm not here, or if you just want code quality improvements, that type of thing that are called out from best practices for the type of application you're running, that can be found within here too. If you ever want to manually rescan it, you can click the little play icon, and there you go. There you have it. So that way, even though I'm not getting any vulnerabilities shown up today, tomorrow if a new one pops up, Snyk will alert me and I'll see it directly in the tool I'm using day in and day out to build my Node apps. All right, well, that does it for this video. If you got value out of it, be sure to like it down below and share it with a colleague who could put it to use. And if you made it this far, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos. Thanks for watching, and happy, safe coding, everyone.